Hey, thank you for joining us for another episode of God's Glory and Men's Real Stories. As always, you're in for a treat with a community I want you to see as your own, and a place I hope you can consider a safe space for everyone to feel seen and understood in the stories and conversations you hear today. So relax in hopes that you can feel God's love as well as see God's glory in men's real stories. So my special guest today, he's my campus pastor at Elevation Blakeney. A shout out to all my Blakers. I'd like to welcome Paul Chabai.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you could join me today. This is a treat. I look forward to every sit down, and some of them I tell people I don't ever prepare for these sit downs. I just kind of just prepare for whatever God has in store for what we're going to talk about and all. So let me start off by just having you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, my name is Paul. I have been the campus pastor at Blakeney for almost 4 years now. Okay. And I've been in ministry for about 10 years total. I was at our Uptown campus for about 5.5 years before I was at Blakeney. And yeah, my story is a little bit unique because I didn't want to be in ministry. So I was pretty adamant about just making money, being successful in the business world. You know, that was coming out of college. That was my goal. And then I felt like God kind of melted my heart a little bit and was like, hey, I need you to minister to people. I need you to be a part of this ministry. So my journey was a little bit less of what you'd expect from a pastor. I didn't go to seminary or anything like that. I went to school and studied economics and stuff like that. So really my goal was just to be a business leader, be an entrepreneur, and then God kind of shifted my life over to ministry. So I've been doing that for 10 years now. And yeah, it was just, it's definitely different because we talked about it a little bit earlier. I think a lot of baggage comes with people who work in ministry. And when you hear that, you're like, well, what are you cool or
right? Can I try
to be real or is this going to be a different conversation? So I think with me not wanting to necessarily be in ministry my whole life, it wasn't my goal. I think that gives me a different perspective on those conversations and knowing that I'm talking to a business leader, I'm talking to people who just want to be good dads and better men and stuff like that. I think it helps me kind of have a fresh perspective instead of it's all got to be about the ministry, or it's all got to be about, a specific thing in that moment. So,
right. No, that's good. And, I love the fact that this is an organic conversation because just in your introduction, I'm like it completely changed like what I thought was going to be like my maybe my question. So I don't ever have planned questions. I'm just kind of like shooting it off as God kind of provides me the information. But just the fact that you said, I never really felt as though I wanted to be in ministry, and I'm not sure your story, but what could you kind of expound upon why it just never was something that, because there's so many people that look up to you guys and say, man, I would love to be a minister. I'd love to be a pastor. Just give me the stage and I'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Speak to that for the people who like myself, but now I'm learning you that didn't necessarily want to per se, that wasn't where you felt you were called initially.
Absolutely. Well, I think too, it was a shift in my perspective because I saw ministry as a separate world and the business world as a separate world. So I saw those two things very differently. And so it's on Sunday, you get out of your business world and you get into ministry, right? And then on Monday morning, you turn off your ministry world and you start your business world. That was what it looked like to me. So when I started the idea or thinking through the idea of maybe being in ministry, and God was kind of warming me up to that, I started to realize that those two things are actually, they operate together all the time. So your work is your ministry and your ministry is your work. And so when I realized that those really weren't different, that just because I get paid by a church versus being paid by a corporation, it doesn't change the goal. The goal always has to be developing people, ministering people, bringing them closer to Jesus, whether that's being an accountant, whether that's being in sales, whatever it is, or if it's, being somebody who does that job on a Sunday morning for a church. Those two goals are the same. And I think for me, my brain had separated those two. So that was kind of the journey where it was hey, I don't want to be in ministry. And God was like, but you are. Even now in school, or even now, doing sales for, a startup, tech company in Charlotte. It's that you are doing ministry. So don't ever think that that's not ministry, but I want it to be in a more official sense. And I think that's where God kind of heated me. I don't know, heated my heart up a little bit. I know I keep using that term of it just felt very cold. No, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to support my family. That's going to be my ministry. And God was like, I'm going to soften you to the idea that ministry can also look very different from what you expected. And so I don't know if that's encouragement to people who might be listening who are like, man, I want to be in ministry. I want to be a pastor. And you're like, you are.
Right.
The way that you run meetings
Right,
is
right.
ministry. The way that you react to outside forces, the way that you respond to your other, coworkers, that is ministry. I know you know that, but you don't really experience it.
And you're so, I'm getting so excited because I sit over here and I think about how like sometimes people are like, yeah, when they think of ministry, they think that you have to be in a pulpit.
Correct.
You have to have the title pastor
Yeah.
instead of looking at what you're currently doing as a ministry.
Yeah.
And especially when you're approaching people at your job in a sales space where you're constantly find yourself talking about how good God has been to you.
Correct.
Constantly talking about different things you're experiencing and how you're going through different things. And even if you haven't even contributed to God, just the fact that you can talk about how like you're going through certain things, but then you can minister to another guy who's going through it. And that's so great. But I also noticed how you said, when it comes to I didn't go to seminary school, and a lot of people feel like you have to have those prerequisites before you can be a pastor because
Correct.
and I've learned that and I don't know your exact story or how you would explain it, but I've learned that when God calls you, he doesn't call you to say, okay, hey, look, I need you to take this direction, and then so I would love for you to explain yours and how that normally is explained when people are like, well, wait a minute, you didn't go through the same steps as me as a pastor. Like,
correct. Yeah. I think initially there was a lot of insecurity with that, where it was like, I feel underqualified. I feel like I don't have all the answers. I feel like everyone else has all these licenses and degrees and diplomas from places where you've spent 4 years learning about stuff when I was just learning about the business world. I think I started to realize that ministry, getting to know the people and relating to people in ministry, I'm not ministering to other ministers necessarily, right? I'm not talking to other pastors. I'm talking to business leaders. I'm talking to people who are dads. I'm talking to families. I'm talking to people who live real life. And that is to say, just because you have a degree from like a religious organization, or if you did go to seminary, that you're disqualified. But I just realized that a lot of my conversations are not about the theological backing of Romans 12. It's, hey man, I feel depressed and I feel like I'm not the man that I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, tell me about that. It's like, well, I just feel like I'm not a good dad. I feel like I'm, insecure in who I am. And I'm like, okay, I mean, the Bible has so many answers to that, but I can Google those answers.
Right.
But I can't necessarily sit down and be real and have a conversation with another man. I don't know if there's a certification that approves you for that, but I realized that people just need honest conversation.
Right.
And that's where ministry really starts. That's where Jesus' ministry was.
Yeah.
He would sit down and have a conversation. He didn't quote this. A lot of times when he quoted scripture, it was to the Pharisees.
Right,
Right.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, he wasn't necessarily saying, oh, well, this is what the word says. He was saying, hey, you have an ailment. I'm going to heal that. Or you nobody's ever had lunch with you, because you're the tax collector. I'm going to sit down and have lunch with you. I'm going to have a conversation. And I've realized more and more over the past 10 years that that's really what ministry is a conversation. It's not necessarily the theological pieces that tend to be overcomplicated for a lot of people.
Right.
Once you get into that, it's a lot of fun. Obviously, there's an important piece to ministry of making sure that you have the theological background, that you understand who God is and what his word says. But that's not really the starting point for a lot of people in what is really hurting them and what their ailment is. That's where Jesus met people. He would heal them and then say, go sin no more.
Right,
it wasn't like, hey, have you done all the check boxes that your local minister told you to do? It was like, no, you have an issue of blood. I'm going to heal it, then go sin no more.
Right.
It was like the ailment was the first thing that Jesus related to people. And I think that's where I find my ministry the most effective, is when I'm not necessarily quoting scripture or unpacking these deep theological concepts. It's when I'm just willing to have a conversation and be real and be honest and be vulnerable at a certain point. I think that's where that process of being in ministry, and it has helped me feel more confident in ministry, where I might not have the theological background, I might not have the seminary background, but I can have a good conversation, and I know how to ask people questions, and I know how to sit in some bad feelings with people. And that, to me, I'd rather point people to Jesus through good conversation than through all of my vast knowledge about the Bible. And again, some people might disagree with that.
No,
that's just where I've realized that very few people are like, Paul, what does the Bible say about this subject? It's not that conversation. It's I'm not feeling good.
Right.
I'm having a bad day. I feel like I'm failing in my life. So let's talk about those things. And I think that's where
That's,
I want to meet
love
people,
that.
you know.
I
So,
love that.
yeah.
And I feel like that's an approach in love, to where you're meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
And not necessarily meeting them with a bunch of words, but sometimes it may even be silence. But I love
Correct.
that though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just being able to listen and hear them and be with them in what they may consider the darkest times of their life sometimes. And
100%.
that's really good. So when it comes to like being able to be there for them, who is Paul outside of, you know, what most people witness when it comes to like just seeing you maybe just on Sundays?
Yeah, well, so I think something I teach my team, my staff, is that if the person who's on stage is different from the person who's off stage, then you're not communicating well. So the person who is on stage should be very similar when you're talking, when you're hosting, when you're preaching, should be the same person people get, whether that's the same energy or different energy, whatever that looks like for you. So I always try to make sure that the person that people see on a Sunday morning when I'm up on stage is the same person you'll get if you see me in a supermarket on, you know, Monday
Right.
or at a restaurant with my wife on a Tuesday. Like I don't want those two things to be different. Again, there's a concept of appropriate vulnerability where there's things that I'll share with. Jesus structured his ministry in a cool way. It's called the 3, the 12, and the hundreds. So Jesus had his 3 favorite disciples, his 12 disciples, and then the hundreds that followed him. And it was all about access. He gave the 3 disciples, he would let them in on things. He would tell them he's frustrated or he's upset, but that he wouldn't tell the 12.
Right.
And then he would bring the 12 in on things that he wouldn't tell to the hundreds. And so I think it became about access for me in ministry, where I was like, I don't want to be a different person. I can't be. That's too exhausting to live 2 different lives, to be Pastor Paul and then weekday Paul. You know, I'll make inappropriate jokes and stuff with my friends. So it's not that, but it's at what level do I allow people access to my life? And so I have those 3 favorite people. I have the 12 that are closer in, and then I have the hundreds that know who I am and know exactly what I stand on, but I might not give them as much access to all the pieces of my life, which I think that's important for everybody. But I would hope that people would say that the person I see on Sunday is the same person that I would get on a Tuesday or a Thursday or Friday in whatever setting. But there is that level of, like we were talking about earlier, of that vulnerability that I think everybody seeks out, to where I'm not a different person, but also do want to be a place where I can be safe for people. And I think that's the thing that in ministry is important. And I think that's where you can get in all these conversations about, you know, drinking and stuff like that, where it's like, I don't want to be a stumbling block for people. So if it's going to cause someone else to not be able to talk to me about something or a subject, then I think that's a real question I have to have in my heart of, is this worth it?
No.
You know, is it worth it for me to do these things that might cause someone else to stumble or might not feel comfortable having a conversation? Social media, am I going to post something about this subject that is going to be polarizing, but is it going to limit my ability to have an honest conversation with somebody about what the Bible might say about it?
Right.
And that's a real conversation I have to have in my mind of like, I'm going to post this. Is that really, am I going to want to have these conversations on Sunday? You know, and so if you look at my social media, it's all about my son and my wife, and that's it. But I know that a lot of people really try to figure that out. Is I'm passionate about a subject and I'm going to be honest about it, but then it creates some issues where it's like, you might have just isolated a lot of people from that conversation, you know, because you took a stance
on one side, and now you have those one-sided people. Correct, but the other side is just like,
which is not to say don't ever take a stance. It's just some people take a stance without considering the fallout effects of those silent people that will never have a conversation with me about it now. I think that's a scary thing for me in ministry, is like, I don't want to do that. I want anybody with any subject to be able to come up to me and say, what does the Bible say about this? Or what do you believe about this? Or I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? And I think that's a place where I think God's brought me to. But it's a conversation I have to always have in my mind of, I don't want to be a different person. I don't want to be 2 people, you know, Pastor Paul and then Private Paul. But there is a level of, I think, appropriate vulnerability and access that I want to give people that I think is important. You just have to process through that. Yeah, definitely
agree with that, and it almost speaks to like one of the messages we just recently heard about. You know, with certain access, it comes with certain responsibility.
100%.
And when you're giving certain people that access, they're responsible not only for the access you're giving them, but sometimes being able to be responsible for how you may move forward with
100%.
the access you've given them. And so, like, if you don't want the responsibility of that, then don't ask for the access as well. And so, that's
I'll give you a practical story. Early on in my ministry, when I was at Uptown, there was a woman who came in and she was struggling with homelessness and she needed some help. And so of course I'm like, oh yeah, here's my phone number. Yeah, let's talk more and stuff like that. And she would text me every single hour and be like, hey, I'm really, I need food. I'm here. And I had this anxiety because I had given her access to me personally that I was trying to be help. You know, I was trying to make sure she was in a good spot. But then I realized that I wasn't able to lead her well because I had given her this much access, but also she was not showing that responsibility that she needed to. So it became this thing where she started lying about things, and it became a big mess. But I started to realize I have to have a level of appropriate access for people where, hey, either here's my email. I know this is really practical, but it's just how my brain works of I can't give this person who has shown no responsibility to my life access to contact me whenever they want to.
Right.
And it starts to get overwhelming, and I can't do my job well because now there's 10 other people that need my access who need to have a conversation with me, but I can't because I'm so anxious about this one specific person.
Right.
So I think that's been a practical piece for me where I had to learn the lesson the hard way where, you know, this woman was really going through a difficult time. We ended up getting her help, but it was not through a text message to me. It was through the right channels that we could help support her and get her out of the situation.
That's good.
But I think everyone has a certain, probably an example they can think of where they've allowed too much access to somebody with too little responsibility, and it just, you know, the train goes off the rails, and it just gets overwhelming, and it feels like, well, what am I doing here? You know,
right. Yeah. And you really are trying to approach with love, but you 100%. Have to sometimes really think out how you want to approach, how you want to access that, instead of just like making a knee-jerk reaction to say, I'm going to open the doors, I'm going to throw it open and see however I can help you, and saying, well, wait a minute, I probably should have thought that out better because I don't actually have all the tools to really be able to help you, and this is not helping me now with having to respond to you. Yeah.
It's like the illustration from Sunday where it's like, do you have a password on your bank account?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it doesn't mean you're not generous if you have a password. It just means that you have to allow a level of access and appropriate, you know. I think that's a great illustration because it's true. Just because not everyone can be your best friend doesn't mean you're mean, right? It just means you're allowing those boundaries to be established. And I think that's an important thing in ministry. But I will say, though, I think a lot of people struggle with that idea, that process of not only establishing their own boundaries, but also respecting the boundaries of other people and being like, you know, how appropriate is it to be in this conversation? Or, you know, are you just going to lay all your cards out and then I'm going to have to feel like I'm laying all my cards out? You know, I think that's that dance a little bit that happens in ministry. It's like, you know, can we be real? And you're like, we can be real. And then the other person's like, well, here's everything I'm struggling with. Here's my sins. And you're like, whoa, I wasn't there yet. You know, it's like, this is a getting to know you phase. And so I think it's something that people struggle with a lot. But that's the conversation I have a lot too, is when I have that little white name badge, it shows that I'm on staff. People come up and they're like, here's my biggest struggle and I need help. And I'm like, okay, guess we're through the barriers and everything like that. And I appreciate that because I want people to be honest. But then the personal Paul is like, I don't want them to feel like I'm not being their best friend, or if I'm not giving them my phone number, you know, that they can call me 24/7 on. I try to help them at the best level I can. But it's always something that's in the back of my mind. Like, are you being appropriately vulnerable? Are you giving the right access? But then also, like, are you loving on people? And are you really, really caring for people at the right level? So it is. It feels like a constant battle, but, you know, it's part of the fun piece of ministry, I think.
No, that's really awesome. And, you know, as you explain that, you know, I think about how, like, yes, you do find yourself at the back end of, or you know, sitting with people through a lot of their struggles, them immediately recognizing you or knowing who you are and saying, hey, look, I want to talk to you about this. Do you ever think to yourself, because I've had people ask me this, even when they say, you know, you go to help so many other people, who's helping you, and what are some of the things that people are sitting there telling you about that you're like, you have no idea, but I'm struggling with that too right now. And the best thing I can do for myself a lot of times is pray about it, knowing that I can't fight this battle on my own.
Correct. Yeah.
So yes, not that I understand exactly what you're going through, but I can understand what that may feel like sitting in that myself.
I think Leah would love that you're asking that question, because my wife, I think she knows that I struggle with that a lot, where you're always available to other people, but who's available to you? Yeah. And so I think that's probably the hardest part of ministry, is finding people who you can be real with, not about ministry, but just about how you're doing. And I think I have a good friend group and stuff like that. And I think having a diverse friend group in terms of being in ministry or not in ministry. I think that always keeps your head a little bit more level too. I think your friend group should be really diverse, not all from the same group or not from the same job. It should be people who work with you. Yeah.
Right. They shouldn't all think like you is it either, because I mean, like, you normally can think about what you 100%. Want to do or would do, but if they all think like you, then they're giving you the exact same answer you've already thought of, and so it doesn't really help.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important to have that where people are like, hey, that's not right, or you're not in the right place, or you're not healthy, or some people are like, no, you're good. I mean, you're struggling with that, and you should. You know, that's a weird place to be, but I get it. And so I think that's where I've had to really work on identifying what those 3 people are. I mean, you could say just 3 people. I think my circle's probably 5 or 6 people who just know what I go through, who know what I've been through, and can be honest, and I can just pick up the phone and call and not have to feel the weight of ministering to them. I think that's a big piece where it's like sometimes it feels like a lot of my conversations can be one-way streets. Because again, I don't expect that. When I join ministry, when I do that, I kind of set aside my selfish desire to be invested into in every conversation, and know that might be my role for a lot of people. So you have to understand that when you go into ministry, but it can feel like some Sundays where I walk away and I'm like, man, I just poured myself out. You know, is there anybody that can pour into me? You know, and those are the inner circle people that are like, hey man, you crushed it. You want to go golfing this week? You know, or something like that. Where it's like, yeah, we don't even have to talk about church. We don't even have to talk about sermon. We can just talk and hang out. That's so safe important. Place, that haven to go to.
That's so, and that's really what this was kind of all built around. And that, you know, there are so many people that do pour out. They pour out, and whether it be because of different things they grew up having to feel as though they have to please people, and their whole identity is pleasing others, or whatever it may be, you know, they find themselves at the end of like pouring until they realize their cup's empty, and at that point they don't have a person to actually come and say, hey, look, let me pour back into you. What's going on in your life right now? Like, what are you I know you take on everybody else's issues, and sometimes you literally go home with that stuff and that weight of like, I hope they get help. I hope that this person is able to receive what they need. You know, what should I do? How can I help more? But then you get to that point where it's like all of a sudden things break down in your life. And it's like, well, who's checking in on Paul to say, hey, you okay, Paul? Like, everything good? Like, everything in your life, you know? Because I realized how important that is when it comes to just running empty and looking around and realizing you don't have those people.
Absolutely. Now, I have a question for you.
Do
you ever feel like with this podcast, do you feel like you have wisdom to share that gets left unsaid because you feel like you're the one kind of leading the conversation? So obviously it's like, I'm going to ask this question knowing this person's perspective, but also, do you ever feel like you leave wisdom left behind almost, where it's like, man, I probably would have said that, but because I'm the one guiding this conversation, that wasn't the right place for me? Because I feel like that can be a place too where it's like, I would have provided this little instance of information, or I would have given this story had I been asked that question. Do you ever get that sense, or do you feel like? Well,
you know, I try to do this perfect, and it's never perfect. So let me go ahead and throw that word out, because we threw that word out of my house. I try to do this balance where I recognize that some people a lot of times just want to be heard. And advice is great, but not everybody is looking for advice.
True.
And even though I can hear, and not that I'm a therapist, but I've recognized how when you go to therapy, you're not going there for advice. You're going there a lot of times to unpack everything.
Exactly.
And so in unpacking, nobody's necessarily looking at each thing and saying, okay, let me advise you on this.
Correct.
No, they realize that you need to unpack just so you can look at it. And a lot of times, even in looking at it, and as you start to take more out and start to talk through different things, it's not always advice or things that I want to respond back, because I can always speak from my own personal growth and things in my journey that have happened. But I recognize how sometimes, you know, maybe that response may need to be had off air. Maybe it might help a lot of other people outside of that person. So maybe I will speak into it. But I recognize that I like to listen, and I think that's where I've had God working on my own heart to be more of a listener than a speaker, because I've always wanted to fill air with noise. I didn't like silence. And so sometimes it's okay to sit in silence with people. You know, that's one thing that I enjoy with my grandmother before she passed. You know, we didn't have to have a lot of words, but just being there with her, and like even if we were both just looking at the TV and then there was nothing we were really watching, it was just making time. It just felt like it was good to be in the space with that person. And so a lot of times I like to be in the space with people instead of just advising, because what worked for me may not work for you. It may not be a good fit for you. Yeah. But I know that what you're doing now, as far as talking about some of the things that you're going through, that's probably one of the biggest helps right there, because a lot of people don't get that space to like talk about the things they're going through.
Oh yeah.
And that's so important, which is why they normally find you, or they find somebody and you think to yourself, okay, are you like isolated from people? And they're like, no, I go to a job. I actually go to a job every day while I'm around people, or I have my spouse at home that I could, but a lot of times maybe that space with those people isn't safe enough for them to talk about what they're going through. I guess I would say that a lot of times I like to listen more than I speak, and I realize that gives them more of the room to continue to unpack, instead of like feeling like, okay, every time I say something, he's going to approach it with the new piece of information. It's like, okay, what do you got to say to that? Like, no, it's just good, and I appreciate you sharing that. So
that's awesome, and I think the world needs more good question askers. Yeah, you know, I hate having a conversation with somebody that I know is just, where'd you go to school? And oh, cool. What do you do for work? I'm like, come on, man. Like, you know, I love having like those conversations that feel like I don't know if you do fantasy football, like a snake draft, where it's like, all right, that first person drafts that first person, and then you need to follow the next one, and you kind of, it's like a domino situation.
Right.
If I tell you something crazy about my life, and then your next question is, where'd I go to school? It's like, are you following the conversation at all? You know, I love people who ask good questions and are like, I was going to ask you something else, but based on what you just said, hold on, let's unpack that.
Right, let's go this direction. You know, no, and I feel like it's important, because what it lets the person know is that I'm listening to you. Yeah. This is not just like I have a bunch of questions written down here, and regardless what your response is, I'm going to the next question, the next topic. Like, okay. Yeah. I feel like in any, and I think I got that skill from interviews, and that when you sit down with people, you let them know you're hearing them by saying, that was good. Like, I was gonna maybe go this direction with my first question, but no, you the way you just went into that. And so I understand how important that is. And I find myself doing that a lot. And like you said earlier, you said this about, you know, being called into ministry. And even though, you know, I fear being called into the ministry of like standing on a stage and being a pastor because of my own past, I realized that my ministry is this. This is I like to approach people with love, but I like to meet them where they're at, and not be like, well, you gotta clean up and get that together, and then I'll come, or you can come and meet me halfway or something. Like, no, I mean, matter of fact, to speak to something you said one time, I like to meet people in the middle. Yeah. And I remember you gave us a leveler one time, and that made so much sense. Like, it was like if you can meet a person in the middle of that leveler, instead of asking them, they have to get it right, or hey, look, clean up a little bit, or hey, look, you got to stop that first, or whatever. If I can meet you in the middle, then that's where you need the most help. Correct. You don't, sometimes you don't have the strength to step out and move forward. Like, I'm so tired. Can you just meet me here now? Because I've done so much to get here.
100%. Yeah. And I think there's a reason why God chose the weirdest, most odd people, right, to be the greatest stories. I mean, David was a murderer and a shepherd boy. Right. was a prostitute. Like, I don't think it was a mistake that he chose those people to work these beautiful stories through. And oftentimes the people that man would glorify were the ones that were, you know, jokes were made of. You know, it's like the kings and all these people, like, they really didn't have power in the kingdom, and Jesus didn't really use their stories a lot. So we look at the Bible, and it's like, if God could use David, you know, conniving king who was just not by all of our standards would probably be not a great dude. Right. But yet God used him, because I think that's what God is. That's the story that God is telling through us, is that it cannot be about you. Right. If it's about you and how good you are, then that's your reward. Great. You got the glory, you got the income, whatever you want, that's your reward. But if you want a higher reward, if you want a higher level of satisfaction, I'm going to use the little chinks in your armor, the places that are feel unsafe, or the places that feel like you're vulnerable. Those are the places that I'm going to work in. Right. So I want people to see your life and say only God could do that, not look how successful he is. I wonder what's got going on. You know, like there are those people, but I think a lot of times we want all to live that life of like, look how perfect he is. I wonder how he got so perfect.
Right.
And that's not.
But you know what, though? It's harder to approach a perfect person with 100%. Everything that you're going through, all the flaws, knowing that, like, okay, so you clearly have never had any of these problems that I'm carrying, where when you showcase the real authentic version of you, flaws and all, then now at this point, I connect to that.
Yes,
I see that. Okay, so you're not perfect.
Yeah.
So I don't have to be perfect. Yeah. So like, and it creates a space of like, man, I thought that I was like I just been forgotten. God didn't need me. Yeah. Like clearly, like I can't be going through this if I'm a pastor. But when people see a pastor or a person in a leadership position, whether it be in church, whether it be at the top of the company, whether it be in wherever it may be, it's refreshing to realize that his struggles look a lot like my struggles. Correct. Her struggles look a lot like my struggles.
Yeah.
And if they're struggling and we're struggling together, I'm not alone
here.
Yeah. So you're telling me I'm not alone.
100%,
okay. All right. I because it does feel, when you're going through things, that I know this personally, it feels very lonely.
Yes.
Yeah. You're when you know, in the journeys I've taken and the journey I'm on now, there are times when it feels very lonely. It feels like nobody else is showing me that they're going through the same thing. And sometimes it takes you screaming out, I'm struggling with this, for like maybe like two people to be like, okay, look, so I'm struggling with that too. You know, you're not, okay, yeah. Like, all right, like, and maybe they're not comfortable like letting everybody know like you, but like you've given them a space to be able to admit that, like, okay, I'm going through that too. So let's talk over here, because I'm not ready to quite tell everybody that I'm struggling with that too.
Yeah,
and I've learned that, as I say a lot, vulnerability is my superpower because it allows me to not have to hide behind my struggles.
Correct.
But approach people to realize, oh, okay, so it's the Me Too movement. We're all going through this together, and more importantly, now this creates a space for all of us to sit down and like maybe like want to talk, whether it be around a campfire, whether it be through a Zoom call, whatever. Like this is what creates groups,
100%.
Men's groups. This is what creates women's groups of opening a door to what it looks like really behind like what you're seeing on my highlight reel, which is called, you know, social media.
Exactly.
So no, that's really awesome. So
yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I think letting people in behind the scenes is so important. I think that is, you know, just seeing a little bit of the background. And I think it's even funny because on social media people get so excited when people, like, I love it when The Rock shows his cheat meals. You know, because The Rock is jacked, man. Like, he's like elite level athlete. He played, you know, football, and he's he's the man,
right?
And I love when I see his cheat meals because I'm like, okay, he likes pancakes too. Right, you know, sometimes you see these guys on like social media who are like all, you know, buff and stuff. You're like, yeah, I eat raw chicken every day for, you know, 10 pounds. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? That sounds terrible. So it's funny to see these guys. I think vulnerability is something people beg for, especially on social media. So you'll see people post like, hey, this is me being real this time, you know, or even be real. Like, you have to take a photo. It's like the social media thing where you have to take a photo exactly where you're at that time.
Right.
So people can see the background. Like, life isn't as it seems, you know. I think social media builds up this idea that, all right, this is all perfect, or this workout was great, but they don't, you know, you don't hear about the 55 times I talked myself out of it, the months before, you know, that you're just seeing these highlights. And I think vulnerability is like if you are able to be vulnerable right now, I think it's the greatest currency of getting people on your side, of getting people to get excited about even a product or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I think it's the currency that people are seeking right now. It's just, I need people to be vulnerable. And I think that's what happens when you build a whole society on social media and trying to be the best and trying to show how perfect my life is. People will seek the vulnerability. You know, that's what Jesus was. I think he was able to be that for people, and he was a human. He was fully human and fully God, but yet he was letting us into some of those human pieces of him. And I think that's where the most powerful moments of ministry happen. You know, like you were saying, like sometimes you need just to scream, "I'm not okay," and then the two guys are like, "Me neither." You know, and you're like, all right, that's a connection, you know, and that's what people need.
Right.
You know, and then you end up getting 50, 60 guys all together that all have the same problem.
Right.
And they just needed the first domino to fall. You know?
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. That's really good. So I can't, of course, conclude these conversations sometimes, if I have the space in the room to, without like asking. So when it comes to like, we talked about this earlier about, you being able to pour into so many people, outside of you being able to have your core group, the people that have access to you, what do you find yourself doing, or are you doing anything to like help with your own mental health on a regular basis, based on your own? Because I know that's a stigma that men don't really normally have to deal with anything. We just kind of push through it. We suck it up, and we work through life, and because my grandfather and his grandfather and his grandfather never really needed any help, and they push through it.
And steel mines.
What are you currently doing in the wide scope of a realm of mental health? What are you doing to really pour back into yourself outside of like your core group that you spoke about?
Well, I think I will say, and I'll be vulnerable in this, I'm not very good at it. I think it's something, probably my biggest challenge in ministry is I think I might say this about myself, I think other people might not say it about me, but I feel like the most undisciplined person in my group, like, and it's not from a place of like, I'm just like slamming ice creams all the time. Not from that, but more of, I don't have a lot of structure. I like kind of running by the hem of my pants, like, oh, okay, let's just kind of figure out what this day will hold.
Right.
And so I'm not good at structuring things out. So I will say, I think having those consistent conversations with safe people is something that I love. I have people that know that about me. And so when I'm getting to a dark place or I haven't been responding to texts, they'll just shoot me a call and say, we need to talk.
Right.
And it's not like, hey, what are you doing, man? It's more like, hey, let's have some time. I have one of my buddies who says, he just texts me and says, hang soon, and that's it.
Right.
And I know it means let's go by the fire, have like a fire pit. Let's just hang out and talk about whatever dumb crap we want to talk about. But it's a safe place.
Right.
And it's a place where it's like we can be vulnerable. And so I think I've structured my life in a way where I think those guardrails are... Let me say this. I've structured my life where the guardrails are good, but I haven't learned how to drive well yet. So I have like those safe walls on the sides. Where if I get unhealthy, I have people and I have systems to kind of help me, not fly off the cliff. But I'm definitely not a good driver right now. And I don't know how to kind of like just stay in my lane well. I think that's something I'm still trying to figure out. And obviously it comes with every new season. We just had a baby, 10 months old. So it's like all the discipline things that I was like, I'm going to work out at this time. It's like, Canyon wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, oh, cool. I had a plan for the day and I don't anymore. But I do think I think I'm starting with those guardrails. And then I'm slowly working on my way to figure out what are the things that I can really stick to, whether it's working out consistently, whether it's just, having some structured conversation, even calendaring time to just think, like I don't have that. I don't do that well. And so sometimes I'm just like we have a sermon that we're preparing over the next couple months. And I'm like, I just need time just to not even study or go into like the Bible, but just process.
Right.
What are some things that I've been working on, or what are some things that I've seen recently? I think that's where my best, content comes from. It's just reflecting, and I think I don't do a good job of that. So again, I wish I could give you more or things like that. And I do feel like my mental health is in a good spot, but I think it's something where I don't structure it well. And I feel like I need to get better at that, but
and don't get me wrong, everything you threw out, a lot of the things, even though you said, hey, look, I'm still trying to work on that, but just like even like I'm going to make time to handle those thoughts that I didn't have time to focus on before, and I had to just keep pushing them off. I'm going to sit with those thoughts that I've normally like. I've bookshelfed them for now, and I'll get back to you. That's great, and I noticed you even have a great group around you, like even your work system, your work group. Because I have never until just recently seen a campus or a church that has a sensory room. Yeah, and a lot of people that don't know what a sensory room is, that's a room where it creates a space where you can kind of like just step away from everything, because some people can't handle all of the just so much much noise and so many things, people running around. And I trust me, I've had moments where I think one Sunday I thought about like just stopping what I was doing while I was serving and just going in that room and just kind of like okay, slow down.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This room feels safe.
Yes.
This room has a nice, calming, like safe space moment where I'm going to just stop, breathe, and then I'll go back to what I was doing. But I need a moment where, and sometimes just people giving themselves that moment or creating that space in their home, even if it's just in a closet, to where you can just kind of like break away from everything that's going on, 100%. All the noise, to just say, so, you know, I know, I don't know who created that space, but like it's funny how you never know the people you have around you that realize like, okay, this is what I needed for myself.
Correct. Yeah.
So I created it for others.
Yeah. And part of it too is what I coach my team on, and this is something I think maybe helps my mental health a little bit that I think I'm disciplined in, is if you think about it, how many conversations do you have in your mind where you lose the conversation? So you have an argument. Let's just say you want to ask for a day off, right, for your work, and you know it's kind of a sensitive time right now, or whatever it is, or people are getting laid off, or whatever it is.
Right.
And you're like, no, that won't work. Boom, you just lost that conversation.
Right.
So what I tell my team is, I say, have that mental conversation and lose it, but then have it again and win it.
Right.
And see how much better your mindset gets when you realize that, hey, maybe I'm not an idiot, maybe I'm not a dummy, maybe I'm not a loser, or maybe I'm, you know, I can ask this, and they say yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of where my mental health comes from, is I'll have the conversation in my brain and I'll win the conversation, and then I'll have it in person, and it goes typically more like that than it does the other way.
Right.
But imagine how many people are walking around just thinking that they're always losing conversations. They're having these fake conversations in their mind, and they're losing them over and over again. So part of the sensory room was, I was working with my e-kids director, and she was like, hey, I feel like this would be cool, but I feel like it might get frowned upon. I said, stop. What if that's the best thing we ever do? What if everyone's like, oh my gosh, let me literally add an addition to my campus so that I can what if that's the conversation?
Right.
And we walked down that path, and that's where it led, was, wow, this is incredible. And now families' lives are being changed. We've already heard stories from one weekend of having it where they're like, I feel seen. I feel like my church sees me.
Right.
You know? And it didn't stem from this crazy, you know, logistical thing that we were doing. It was one person saying, maybe I can win this conversation. Maybe we do need something for kids that feel a little overwhelmed to just go and just have some space. And we won the conversation.
Right.
And then we won the situation.
Right,
so
right.
I think that's where like my mental health has gotten better from that, where it's like I'm not just walking around defeated because I'm having all these imaginary conversations that I lose. I'm trying to tip the scales a little bit more, and knowing that, hey, God has put something in me. He's given me skills. He's given me a mindset. He's given me experience. So maybe I can win some of these conversations.
Right.
And then you go into the actual conversation, and you feel more confident, and you're able to, instead of feeling like you have to run uphill, you're like, no, we're just having a normal conversation. Two people about a subject. Let's figure this out. And I think a lot of people feel insecure going into even a simple request, because it's like, all right, I'm a loser. I lost this conversation in my mind 20 times.
Right.
Yeah, maybe you can just create a pattern where you just win the conversation one time. How is that going to go? It's going to go great. Perfect. Let's try it.
That's so good.
See how it happens. So
see, and even that right there, that speaks to a lot of our mental health, because we'll talk ourselves down, we'll defeat ourselves in our head, we'll already steer ourselves off of maybe a course that God's taken us to say, hey, look, I want you to do this. He's the one that started that conversation, just for you to be like, no, but they won't like that, or no, you know, they'll turn me down. And so we've already deterred ourselves from where he's trying to take us without even having the actual conversation with the person. And as some people always say, well, what's the worst they could give you? A no. But the truth is God has already worked it out in some cases to where they're prepared to say yes. He's already worked that out. It's just that you've boxed him in to say, hey, look, I don't think that's going to go well.
Even how you started this podcast. I'm sure there were times where you're like, it's not going to work, or people won't say, whatever it is that you I bet you fought that battle in your mind, but I think it was just maybe winning that battle a couple times. And like you said, just some of these resources where you were like, only God could have done that. I've been trying to help you win this conversation in your mind because I put it in your heart. I gave you the direction, but you keep telling yourself you're a loser in all these situations. And God's like, stop doing that. Like,
or don't reach out to this guy. He's not gonna he's gonna laugh. Or man, listen, if I could tell you how many times I've done that, only to finally just muster it up, to just knock on the door, and they'd be like, yeah, dude, what's up, man? I've been waiting to do this. And I'm like,
100%.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's a good pattern to get yourself into. Just even if it's not always winning every conversation in your mind, just give yourself a couple of victories. And I think that's helpful.
No, that's awesome. That is so good. That's so true. And listen, I hope you truly got notes on that, because that is a huge, like even in that is something that people struggle with daily. And just the fact that speaks to even like where your mental health is, that you don't at least allow your thoughts to take hold and to derail you from what you're supposed to be doing. That's one thing that a lot of us could just focus on, of like, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to push through the fear of what my mind's telling me versus what could be on the other side of the fear. And I'm going to push through that fear. So no, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, look, you know what? I want to make sure I give you an opportunity just to maybe like leave us with any final words, anything that you may want to just impart on my audience, just that you may have on your heart today that you may just want to like leave us out with.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we've kind of already talked about. I think vulnerability is something we all want. And I think a lot of the people around us need as well. Mm-hmm. So I think if you can if our world could have more confident men who are willing to be vulnerable with each other, I think the world would be a much better place. And I think whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in your family, I think I struggle with that too, with my family, of trying to be vulnerable. If I'm not doing well, Leah knows it. Right. You know, she can sense it from me, but I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm fine. You know, and she's like, I know you're not. I just need you to say it. You know, right. I think that's kind of that idea that we talked about, where it's like, well, my great grandfather was in the mines, and you know, it's like, that's fine. That was good for that season, but I think it's important for us as men to realize that vulnerability is important, and I think it is a currency of connection. You know, and it's like, if I can just say, hey man, even walking out of a meeting, be like, that felt rough. Yeah, me too. You know, whatever it is, just to be honest about it. I think that's what we need more of, and I think that's what will help us. I think it'll help us connect with Jesus more too. You know, those are the people that Jesus really, I think, gravitated towards it and really healed. Were the people, not the people that were like, I'm fine, Jesus. It was the ones that said, all right, I'm at the end of my rope. Right. The only thing I can do is touch the hem of his garment. The only thing I could do is push through the crowd and try to get to him. And it was those people that were just desperate for vulnerability and saying, hey, I don't know what else to do. I think if we had more people and more men in our workplace that were willing to say, hey, I'm kind of at the end of my rope, I just need some help, I think we'd be in a much healthier place. So I just encourage anybody who's listening just to do that, and to have your group of friends, to have your group of people, your 3 or your 12, where you can just be honest. Hey, I'm not doing well, and I'm struggling, but also be that for other people. Be a safe place where other people can be vulnerable with you too. So.
No, that's awesome, and I appreciate your gift of vulnerability today. Of course, yeah. And I love how you ended that with just like, you God can't help you if you're not real with him. God can't help you if you're hiding behind things as if he doesn't see it already. He wants to reach you where you're at. So let him know where you're at.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. Well, hey, look, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you sitting down with me. It's always an awesome treat to be able to sit down with somebody that in this case, I didn't know a lot about you outside of what I see, and just the laugh and the conversation and the soccer we may talk about. But like outside of that, it was really great to like really be able to like sit down with you and you share a lot of you with my audience as me. So
and you've seen me at my most vulnerable is watching Argentina almost fail in the World Cup. So you've really seen me. You've seen me at my darkest moments and my highest joys.
But I've seen you at your highest joys too. And all I can ever think about is the video. If nobody knows Paul, you gotta add Paul on social media just so you can watch his joy when you jumped in the air. Yes. But no, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you coming, brother. I really do. I thank you for sharing with my audience today. I thank my audience for joining us today on this episode. I appreciate my son for always being there behind the scenes to really help us out and get everything going. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for continuing to support and share these messages with others who may just need to hear this. All right. So, hey, you guys be blessed. Thank you again for joining. We'll talk to you again soon.
We appreciate you listening today and hope that if you enjoyed this episode, you'll like and subscribe and also listen to past episodes. We hope to bring you great future content as well. Please comment your thoughts on this episode as well as leave any prayer requests below so that this community can pray alongside you. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at God's Glory and Israel Stories.
Brothers, We understand how the thoughts of even facing your own past and current story and the pain and hurt that come along with this is no easy task. But you're not alone, as you hear in these episodes. Nor has God forgotten you or left your side, as He's in it with you, fighting alongside you through the storms of life. He loves and has already forgiven you, no matter what you have done, and He wants a relationship with you. Your healing, freedom, and growth are important to God and to us as well. Maybe you're considering giving up or need someone to talk to. Here are a few resources that exist that we hope can shine a light into that dark place you're in. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is 1-800-273-8255. If you need support but are not in crisis, consider reaching out to a warm line with individuals who would love to talk with you. Speaking to someone on these calls is typically free and confidential and run by people who understand what it's like to struggle in life. Find a local number by going to warmline.org.